Hi, Merry Christmas. Happy Friday, and thanks for being with us. Usually at the end of the year, you have to practice saying the name of the new year, right? Because it's unfamiliar. You write the wrong year on your checks. In our 21st century, there's kind of an awkwardness about whether you say 2000 and something or 20 something. There is an end of the year weirdness about the year switching over, usually. Not this year. This year, I can't believe it isn't already 2012, given the number of times I say the word 2012 every day. The voting in the 2012 presidential race starts in a week and a half at the Iowa caucuses, to be followed in very quick succession by New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada and Florida and so on. The Republican Party picking its nominee to run against President Obama is a huge story, and it is a huge deal for the country. I think it is basically worth all the blanket coverage that it gets. That said, I don't think even the forward-looking national 2012 obsession in news about politics this year means that the 2012 race is the most important thing going on in American politics this year. The most important politics in America in 2011 are not about just the setup for next year's presidential race. I think they are about the consequences of the last election. They're about governing. They're about governing and its discontents. In the midterm election in November 2010, the Republicans basically ran the table. They not only won control of the House of Representatives in Washington, they really ran the table in the states. Governorships, state legislatures, whole state legislatures. And as that red tide of state legislators and state officials and governors was sworn in January of this year, the story of 2011 politics began. The story of 2011 politics really became the way that they governed in the states, because they had a really big idea about that. If Congress under Republican control is where policy goes to die now, the states under Republican control are where policy goes to let its freak flag fly. A lot of these new Republican governors in particular have been reading from the same playbook all year long. And the policies that they have all been instituting, they're all very similar, have sparked a really big backlash. A big backlash that has showed the country a whole new, whole different side of what it means to have an energized Democratic base. Elections have consequences. On Friday, Governor Walker announced suddenly that he was refusing to negotiate with anybody who worked for the state. No negotiations. Instead, he would direct the Republican-controlled legislature to pass by fiat this week his new budget that goes after the benefits and bargaining rights of people who work for the state. So not only would he not negotiate with people on this, he will never negotiate with them again. He will remove their right to collectively bargain, in essence. While shocked by the radicalness of his proposal and by how fast he is trying to jam it through, state workers in Wisconsin prove that they are not going to take this lying down. Look at this. An estimated 30,000 people protested in the state capital of Madison today. 30,000 people. This is an existential fight for the Democratic Party. That's why Wisconsin looks the way it does right now. That's why the streets of Madison were shut down to traffic today, because of the sheer number of people who turned out. That's why people slept in the Capitol Rotunda overnight. That's why the state legislature looked like this today. Democratic legislators wearing orange T-shirts that read Assembly Democrats Fighting for Working Families. And that is why 14 Democratic state senators in Wisconsin went AWOL today. They refused to turn up for the anti-union vote scheduled in the state Senate today. Right around noon, these Democrats just disappeared. And in their absence, the Republicans could not get a quorum, and therefore they were unable to hold their big anti-union vote, which they plan to hold today and they plan to win. To avoid the threat of being forcibly returned to the state capitol, Democratic senators did not just not turn up at the state legislature today, they fled the state. Joining us now is a Democratic Wisconsin state senator named John Erpenbach. He joins us now from a reportedly secure but, alas, undisclosed location.
This is systematically dismantling some of the best parts about the state of Wisconsin. You know, our public employees, they plow our roads, they clean our streets. There are teachers, there are prison guards, they are the people who run our great state parks. And you're saying to them, what you do doesn't really matter. Not only do we want you to pay your fair share, which they're more than willing to do, we want to bust your union. And that tears at the very fabric of the state of Wisconsin, and it's not the right way to go.
Last night, in the blink of an eye, Republicans in the Wisconsin Senate wiped away most union rights for most of the state's public employees. Today, Republicans in the state assembly did the same over the loud and vocal protests of those who had gathered outside the chamber, as well as the Democratic representatives inside the chamber. Republican Governor Scott Walker has pledged to sign it into law as soon as possible. Recall petitions have been filed against 6 Republican state senators now. If only 3 of those succeed, this fight will have turned the state Senate in the middle of their term from Republican-controlled back to Democratic-controlled. 6 incumbent Republican state senators faced recall elections and a backlash against those Republicans who supported Republican Governor Scott Walker's stripping of union rights in Wisconsin. 2 Democrats did unseat the Republicans they targeted yesterday. Jennifer Schilling beat Republican incumbent Dan Kopenke 55-45, and Jessica King defeated incumbent Randy Hopper 51-49%. Jessica King's victory rally, which you can see here, captured the spirit of a lot of happy Democrats in the state last night. They were pumped up. They recalled 2 Republican senators from office, thus reducing the Republican majority in Wisconsin's Senate down to 1. That said, had Democrats prevailed in just one more race, they wouldn't just have narrowed the Republicans' majority. Democrats would have been in control of the state Senate. They didn't get that. So bottom line, Republicans were delighted they didn't lose control of the Senate. Democrats were disappointed they did not win that. But Democrats are happy that they picked off 2 Republican senators, and they are happy that the margin in the Senate is at least for now, down to 1 Republican vote. But also, Democrats say today that they are happy with what last night's numbers might mean for a planned effort next year. Recall Walker, they are saying. Republican Governor Scott Walker. Folks celebrating at Jessica King's victory rally did not wait a day to turn their focus to their next target, to Governor Walker. Chair of the Democratic Party in Wisconsin confirmed today that he'd like to begin the process of recalling the governor, quote, as soon as is feasible. The governor can't be recalled until he's been in office a full year. That requirement will be met this coming January. A new poll out this week on Governor Walker's prospects shows that 58% of Wisconsinites want him to be recalled from office. That's not good for him. Today in Ohio, the Senate there voted Wisconsin-style to strip union rights. The measure passed 17-16, even though 6 Republicans jumped ship and voted with Democrats to protect the unions. In Ohio, Democrats couldn't block a quorum, so they didn't have the option that Wisconsin Democrats had of stopping the bill by leaving the state. The Ohio union stripping measure heads over to the Assembly now, where Republicans will probably pass it there, too. That said, the protests in the streets in Ohio and the wild unpopularity of what Republicans are doing and the Republican defections on this do not make passage a sure thing. And if it does pass, Democrats say they will get it repealed by a public vote this November. This is Ohio Governor John Kasich, a Republican freshman governor just elected in November. After Governor Kasich signed SB 5, people who support union rights in Ohio started collecting signatures to put it on the ballot for a citizen's repeal. Last month, they delivered box after box after box after box of petitions. Today, the Ohio Secretary of State announced that over 900,000 of those signatures were valid. That's nearly 4 times the amount needed to qualify the referendum. This means that there will be a referendum. It's going to be on the ballot. The vote happens in November. In Ohio, the most high-profile race in the country, the bid to recall the Republican union stripping law there, it lost by 22 points, a blowout. All those polls predicting an impossibly high margin of victory for the pro-union rights side in Ohio, those impossible margin of victory polls turned out to be exactly accurate. The Occupy Wall Street protests in New York have been going on for 12 days now. Most of the media attention they have received thus far has been because of violent and rather outrageous police tactics used against the protesters. But the reason this movement is growing, and in fact spreading to other American cities now, is not because of some message about police tactics toward protesters. That is not the larger point. The larger point is the basic message, the basic point about who caused the mess the country is in right now. Who has figured out how to benefit from it, and who is stopping us from fixing it? Police this weekend arrested hundreds of Occupy Wall Street marchers on the Brooklyn Bridge, hundreds of people arrested. Occupy Wall Street now showing signs of becoming Occupy everywhere in America. Occupy Boston, Occupy Chicago, Occupy Portland, Maine, Occupy Seattle.
This is a fantastic, beautiful, bountiful land that's hopelessly in debt. What happened? What happened?
The idea of the Occupy protests is that people stay. That's the Occupy part of it, right? You don't go anywhere. Like Hoovervilles. These are supposed to be semi-permanent living reminders of what's wrong with the economy and the political system. The permanence is part of the pressure. And city officials around the nation, frankly, are not handling this well at all. In Oakland, California, police cleared out protesters from their downtown encampment early Tuesday morning. Later in the day, when protesters returned to reclaim their space, the police response in Oakland was fast-moving, loud, and ultimately violent. It involved tear gas and shooting at the protesters with non-lethal projectiles. Today, thousands of Oakland residents took to the streets for what were reportedly by local press, calling these things the largest demonstration in the East Bay since the days of the Vietnam War. Today in New York City, very, very early this morning, really in the middle of the night, New York City police raided and tore down and cleared out the Occupy Wall Street encampment that has been at Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan for nearly 2 months. The raid happened at 1 a.m. roughly, as most of the protesters there were asleep. New York City police officers dressed in riot gear handed out a written notice to the protesters telling them where their personal articles from the encampment could be retrieved, which sounds lovely until you saw what they were doing to the protesters' personal belongings. There were reports that police used knives to cut up the sturdy military-grade tents that were the best hope of surviving winter down there. You can see police here cutting down the protesters' tent poles with handheld saws, with sawzalls. This was a massive police action. There were 200 arrests early this morning. Zuccotti Park was totally cleared.
I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to put my tent right back up. We show them that we are not just words on an internet screen. We are people, and we are willing to put ourselves in pain and misery to put our point across.
Now, there's no reason to believe that the mass protests in the Midwest against Republican governors and Republican legislatures and laws stripping union rights, there's no reason to believe that those led to the Occupy movement. These things emerged in different parts of the country with different goals, different tactics. It's different people. But if you want to understand the politics of 2011 overall, it is Republican governance in the states sparking huge backlash in the streets. And it's the streets all over the country coming alive with a dissatisfied, energized, organized, creative message from the left. We'll have more on that ahead.